Welcome back, everyone. Before we dive in, make sure you drop your thoughts and the lessons you took from this story in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's get into it. My name is Wesley Carter. I am 35 years old. I'm a systems analyst. And until recently, I thought I understood the rhythm of my life. 3 weeks ago, the rhythm shifted. Small things at first. Jasmine, my wife of 8 years, started keeping her phone face down on the kitchen counter in a way that felt deliberate rather than casual. She took calls in the other room, long calls that ended with her returning quiet and guarded, like she was wrapping herself back up from the inside out. She began getting dressed up for what she called girls' nights out more often than usual. New dresses, careful makeup, the perfume she wore on anniversaries. And I told myself to let it go. I told myself people change their routines. I told myself trust means trusting when you do not have a reason not to. On a Thursday evening, I was loading the dishwasher after dinner when I asked a simple question, the sort of question married people ask as naturally as breathing. I said, "So, what are your plans for tomorrow night?" Jasmine looked up from her phone with an expression that did not belong to the woman who used to laugh over burned pancakes on Sunday mornings. It was defensive, almost annoyed. She said, "Why do you need to know?" I said, "I do not need to know. I'm just asking. We usually talk about our plans." She said, "Well, maybe I do not want to be questioned every single time I leave the house." I stopped what I was doing and turned to face her. I said, "Question? I asked you one thing." She said, "You are always interrogating me about where I am going, who I am with, what time I will be back. It is exhausting." I dried my hands on a dish towel, slowly, letting her words settle where they landed. In 8 years, I had never interrogated her. I had done the normal spouse thing. "Where are you headed? What time do you think you will be home? Should I save you a plate?" Normal was suddenly a crime. "Stop interrogating me about my plans," she said, louder now, like she needed the volume to make the point stick. "I'm allowed to have a life outside this house without giving you a full report." The kitchen hummed with the refrigerator's steady motor. She looked like someone bracing for a fight, sliding into a stance she had practiced. I looked at her, truly looked, and saw someone I did not recognize. Someone who wanted a scene or wanted me to build her an excuse. "You are absolutely right," I said calmly. She blinked, surprised, her mouth parting as if she had expected heat and I had offered water. She said, "I am." I said, "Yes, you are completely right. I apologize for interrogating you. I will not ask again." She studied my face as though searching for sarcasm. I offered none. I offered strategy. "Okay then," she said, guarded but satisfied, and she lifted her phone again like it was a shield. "Good." I finished loading the dishwasher in silence. Then I went upstairs, closed our bedroom door, pulled out my phone, and did something I had never done before. I disabled location sharing. Find My, Google Maps, all of it. No more GPS breadcrumbs tying me to a grid of expectations. Then I opened a new browser tab, typed with steady fingers, and searched for flights to Miami. If Jasmine wanted privacy, I would give her plenty of it. And I would take some for myself, too. The next morning, Jasmine was in a better mood, maybe relieved that I had backed down so cleanly. She kissed me goodbye before heading to work, something she had not done in weeks. She said, "Have a good day." I said, "You too. Enjoy your plans tonight." She smiled like someone who believes they have won a small, important game. She had no idea what was coming. At my desk, while my hands moved through spreadsheets and bash scripts, my mind was elsewhere. The flights were booked: Thursday night departure, Monday afternoon return, a room overlooking Miami Beach, 3 full days of no explanations, no dance around a conversation that had stopped being a conversation. When I got home Friday evening, she was already getting ready. Hair done, makeup sharp. The dress was one I had never seen, a deep, leaf green fabric that glowed against her skin. I stood against the doorway and said, "Heading out soon?" She said, "Yes. Meeting the girls at 7 o'clock." I said, "Have fun." She paused, mascara wand in midair, and said, "That is it? No questions." I said, "You asked me to stop interrogating you, so I stopped." She looked almost disappointed, as if the fight she had preheated had gone cold in the pan. She said, "Okay, I will probably be back late. Do not wait up." I said, "No problem." I watched her leave, listened for the quiet, frictionless sound of tires rolling away from the curb. Then I went upstairs, grabbed the overnight bag I had packed that morning, and called an Uber to the airport. My flight left at 10:15. By the time Jasmine was wherever she actually was, I would be halfway to Florida. She wanted freedom. She would learn about freedom. I landed just after midnight. Outside the airport, warm, salt-edged air moved in steady sheets, and I felt a release climb up from my chest and my shoulders in a slow wave. No explanations. No justifications. No walking on eggshells, waiting for the next accusation. I checked into the hotel around 1 in the morning. The room had a balcony that framed the ocean like a photograph. I stood there for a while, listening to the blunt, clean sound of waves, and realized I had been walking around with my back braced for weeks. Saturday, I woke to 17 missed calls and 32 text messages, all from Jasmine. The first few were casual. She said, "Hey, where are you?" She said, "Did you go somewhere?" Then urgency tightened her sentences. She said, "Why are you not answering? I'm getting worried." By message 20, panic had unthreaded her punctuation. She said, "Please just tell me you are okay. This is not funny. I am about to call the police." I ordered room service, ate breakfast on the balcony, let my phone rest face up, and read nothing. At noon, I sent one message. I said, "I am fine, enjoying my weekend." 3 dots appeared immediately, then disappeared, then reappeared, like a heartbeat that could not find a steady rhythm. After 2 minutes, her response landed. She said, "Where are you?" I set the phone down and went to the beach. The sun laid steady heat on my skin. The water was a clean blue that did not care about my marriage, and I floated a long time listening to the volume of my own breath. When I got hungry, I had lunch at a Cuban place in Little Havana where the servers were brisk and kind, and the picadillo tasted like the kitchen knew what it was doing. I walked through Wynwood, reading color off the walls, moved by art that had nothing to do with me. I had dinner at a steakhouse where the waiter brought me what I ordered and left me alone. My phone kept buzzing like a trapped moth in another room. Around 8 in the evening, I glanced at the screen. 43 more messages. Jasmine was cycling through feelings like radio stations. Anger, fear, guilt, bargaining. She said, "How could you disappear like this? Do you have any idea how worried I've been? I thought something happened to you. This is cruel. We need to talk about this. Please come home." I turned off notifications and slept hard in clean hotel quiet. Sunday, she tried a different approach. The messages softened, then bent toward manipulation. She said, "I'm sorry if I made you feel bad. I did not mean to hurt you. Can we please just talk? I miss you." I was sitting in a small cafe having coffee when I replied. I said, "I will be home Monday evening. We can talk then." Her reply was instant. She said, "Monday? You are not coming back until Monday." I said, "Correct." She said, "Where even are you?" I said, "Miami." The 3 dots came and went 20 times. Then the silence turned thick. I spent Sunday precisely how I wanted. I rented a jet ski and cut white seams across the water until my shoulders burned pleasantly. I ate too much key lime pie at a place crowded with families and people my age who had learned to travel alone. I watched the sunset from a rooftop bar without thinking about posting a photograph. I posted nothing. I told no one else where I was. I did not owe the world a diary. Monday afternoon, I caught my flight home and landed around 6 o'clock. An Uber dropped me at the house at 7:30. Jasmine's car sat in the driveway like a witness. I used my key and walked into a room lit up too bright. She stood in the living room waiting for me, hair pulled back, face bare and raw, eyes red, like she had not slept all weekend. Good, I thought, with a bluntness I did not recognize in myself. "Where have you been?" she said before the door settled back into the frame. I set my bag down and said, "Miami. I told you that." She said, "You told me on Sunday, after I had been trying to reach you for 2 days." I said, "You wanted me to stop interrogating you about your plans. I figured you would appreciate the same courtesy." Her mouth opened, then closed. She hunted for an angle, a way to load blame into the barrel and fire my way. She said, "That is not the same thing at all." I said, "Is it not? You go out Friday night and do not tell me where you're actually going. You come home late. I go out Thursday night, take a trip, and come home Monday. What is the difference?" She said, "The difference is I did not disappear without telling you." I said, "You told me not to ask about your plans, so I stopped sharing mine too." Seems fair. She looked at me like I had grown new bones while she was sleeping. This was not the husband who would apologize quickly because quiet made him feel safe. This was not the husband who would let her rewrite the rules because he loved her. She said, I try to check your location. You turn it off. I said, I value my privacy. I watched her hear her own words wear my voice, saw the clarity sweep across her face, and stop at the edge of what it would cost to admit she had wanted one set of rules for herself and another for me. She said, This is ridiculous. You cannot just take off for a weekend without telling me. I said, why not? You made it very clear that asking about plans is interrogation. So I stopped asking and I stopped answering. That is not what I meant, she said. I said, then what did you mean? She did not have an answer. We both knew what she had meant. She wanted freedom to do whatever she was doing without questions. She had not expected me to claim the same freedom. I picked up my bag. I said, I am tired. Long flight. We can talk more tomorrow if you want. She said, we are talking now. I said, no, we are not. I am going to bed. I walked toward the stairs. She grabbed my forearm. I looked at her hand, then at her eyes, and said, softly but without give, let go. Something in the tone pushed an old button. She released me. I unpacked. I showered. When I came out, she was sitting on the edge of the bed crying. She said, quietly, I was worried about you. I said, were you? Or were you worried about not knowing where I was? She did not answer. I got into bed and turned off the lamp on my side. She sat in the dark for a long time before finally lying down as far from me as the mattress allowed. I slept better than I had in months. Tuesday morning, I left early. At the office, my phone started buzzing around 9 o'clock. She said, we need to talk about what happened. She said, you cannot just ignore me forever. She said, I deserve an explanation. During my lunch break, I responded. I said, you deserve an explanation. That is interesting. The dots appeared. Then nothing. Then she said, what is that supposed to mean? I said, exactly what it sounds like. I put my phone away and finished a project that had a Friday deadline. When I got home that evening, she was waiting in the kitchen. She had prepared herself for this moment. Hair smooth, makeup soft, wearing one of my favorite dresses, a pale blue that I told her made her look like summer. She said, hey, with a forced smile. She said, I made dinner. I looked at the table. Chicken, roasted vegetables, a simple salad. I said, thank you. I already ate. The smile faltered. She said, oh, I thought we could talk over dinner. I said, I am not hungry, but you go ahead. I walked to the living room and turned on the television. She followed, standing in the doorway, as if unsure whether distance or closeness would help. She said, can you please turn that off? We need to discuss this. I muted the television and said, discuss what? She said, everything. The Miami trip. You ignoring me. This whole attitude you have had since last week. I said, what attitude? She said this cold, distant thing you're doing. It is not like you. I said, maybe you do not know me as well as you think. She sat on the other end of the couch like I had placed tape lines where not across. Look, she said, I know I said some things last Thursday. Maybe I overreacted about the questions, but that does not give you the right to just disappear for a weekend. I said, I did not disappear. I went to Miami. I told you where I was. She said, 2 days later. I said, better late than never. She exhaled sharply, frustrated. I watched her change strategies the way a driver changes lanes in traffic, looking for a gap. She said, this is not healthy. This is passive-aggressive. I said, is it? I thought I was respecting your boundaries. You wanted privacy. You got it. I wanted privacy. I took it. That sounds direct. She said, that is not what I meant by privacy. I said, then explain it to me. What did you mean? Her mouth opened and closed. We both knew she could not explain without admitting what she had been doing. She said, I meant I should be able to go out with my friends without you grilling me. I said, I never grilled you. I asked normal questions that normal married people ask. She said, it felt like grilling. I said, and me go to Miami felt like abandonment to you. I guess we both learned something about feelings versus intentions. She stood abruptly. She said, why are you being like this? I said, like what? She said, like you do not even care anymore. I turned the television volume up just one click, then back down. I said, I care about honesty, respect, trust, the basics. She said, and you do not think I have been honest? I said, have you? The question hung in the room like a light you cannot find the switch for. She could have answered it. She could have come clean. Instead, she chose anger. She said, I cannot believe you are accusing me of something when you were the one who took off without a word. I said, I told you exactly where I was. That is more than you have told me about your Friday nights. She said, I told you I was with friends. I said, which friends? She said, why does it matter? I said, it does not. You are right. It does not matter at all. That answer scared her more than if I had pressed. She wanted to be chased. She wanted me to interrogate, to give her something to use against me. Indifference reordered the script she had written. She said, I'm going to bed. When you are ready to have an actual conversation instead of playing games, let me know. I said good night. She stomped upstairs. The bedroom door closed with a heavier sound than necessary. I stayed in the living room, not really watching the television. I thought about the woman I married, the one who would not have exploded over a simple question, the one who would not have called communication control, the one who would have said a Friday night plan out loud because marriage lives or dies on what you say plainly. Wednesday, I left for work before she woke up. Came home late. Thursday, the same. She tried small talk, but I kept us at altitude. Weather, bills, groceries. By Friday, she was unraveling. Out of nowhere, she said, Are you having an affair? I looked up from my laptop. I said, What? She said, You heard me. Is there someone else? I said, You are asking me if I am having an affair? She said, Yes. What else am I supposed to think? You're distant. You are cold. You took a secret trip to Miami. I said, It was not secret. I told you where I was. She said, After you were already there. I closed my laptop and said, Let me ask you something. If you truly thought I was having an affair, why would your first concern be that I went to Miami? Would you not be more worried about who I was with? She blinked. Her logic slipped. She said, I do not understand what is happening. I said, What is happening is that I am giving you exactly what you asked for. Space, privacy, no questions. She said, But I did not ask for this. I said, Yes, you did. You just did not think about what it would look like from the other side. My phone buzzed. A text from Hudson, my coworker and one of my truest friends. Hudson and I had worked side by side for 5 years. He is black like me, a quiet man with an eye for the detail. Everyone else misses and a patient, thoughtful way of telling the truth. He said, Drinks tomorrow? You seem stressed lately. I texted back, Yes, sounds good. Jasmine watched me. She said, Who is that? I said, Hudson. We are getting drinks tomorrow. She said, Oh, okay. She waited for more. Where? What time? When would I be home? I did not offer any of it. She said, with a complicated little smile that tried to hide itself, Have fun. I said, Thanks. Saturday evening, I met Hudson at a bar downtown, a place with dim lighting, high-back booths, and a bartender who remembered our first round after the second. We ordered wings and 2 beers. Hudson said, All right. Talk to me. What is going on? I told him everything. The argument about questions, the way Jasmine had pulled up a wall and painted it privacy, my Miami weekend, the silence that had moved into our house like an uninvited tenant. Hudson let out a long, soft whistle. He said, That is rough, man. I said, The strange part is I do not feel that upset anymore. Just tired. Hudson said, Tired is worse than angry. Angry means you still care enough to fight. I said, Yes. He took a drink, then set the glass down with a quiet tap. He said, Can I be honest with you? I said, Always. He said, I saw her a couple of weeks ago. Friday night. At that Italian place near the highway. Caruso's. I set my beer down and said, Okay. He said, She was not with friends. She was with a man. They were in a corner booth. It looked close. The words landed precisely where I already knew they would. It was not even shock. It was confirmation. I said, Did she see you? He said no. I was picking up takeout. I left before they noticed me. I almost texted you right then, but I did not know if I should. I said, I appreciate you telling me now. Hudson said, What are you going to do? I stare at my drink. I said, I'm going to talk to someone. A lawyer. I want to understand my options. He nodded. Hudson said, Fair enough. If you need anything, let me know. We finished our drinks and asked the bartender for waters. We talked about work deadlines and the new hire who loved to ask questions in 3 paragraphs when one sentence would do. When I got home around 11 o'clock, Jasmine was still up watching television. She said, "How was it?" trying to sound casual. I said, "Good. Hudson says hello." She said, "That is nice." I went upstairs without another word. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling and thought about Caruso's, corner booths, Friday nights, and defensive reactions that were not about the question, but about the answer. Sunday morning, I searched for divorce attorneys. I made a list, checked reviews, read bios. Monday morning, I called out sick from work for the first time in 3 years. I had appointments to keep, and none of them involved standing in a conference room arguing about stories points. The first attorney was expensive with a smile that had more veneer than warmth. The second talked about strategy, like a scavenger describing a feast. The third, a black attorney named Mr. Sterling with a steady voice and eyes that did not blink too much, listened. He said, "How long have you been married?" I said, 8 years. He said, "Children?" I said, "No." He said, "Property?" I said, "We rent. The lease is in her name. I moved in after we got married." He nodded, took notes with an old-fashioned pen, and said, "That makes some things simpler. Any joint accounts?" I said, "1 checking account. I opened a separate one last week and moved half the money." He said, "Good. That is fair. Any other assets?" I said, 2 cars. Both paid off. Mine is in my name. Hers is in hers. Some furniture. Nothing major." He said, "This should be straightforward. No fault divorce. We file. She gets served. There's a waiting period. Then it is done." I said, "How long in this state?" He said, "Minimum 60 days from filing. Could be longer if she contests it." I said, "She will." He leaned back. He said, "They usually do, but from what you have told me, there's no path to prevent it. You want out. That is enough." I hired him. We went over details and filled out paperwork. He talked me through steps with a calm that made the process feel like a checklist rather than an earthquake. When I left his office, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. I spent the rest of Monday disentangling my life responsibly. I called the insurance company to separate our policies. I updated my direct deposit at work to the new bank account. I changed my emergency contact from Jasmine to Hudson. Small changes, important ones. When I got home that evening, Jasmine stood in the kitchen, stirring a pot of something that smelled good. She said, "Hey, you're late. Everything okay?" I said, "Fine. I had errands." She said, "Well, dinner is almost ready." I said, "I am not hungry." Her face fell. She said, "You have not eaten with me in almost a week." I said, "I have been busy." She said, "Busy avoiding me, you mean?" I did not respond. I headed for the stairs. She said, "I know you saw someone." I stopped. I said, "Excuse me." She said, "Saturday night. Hudson told you something." "I can tell." I turned slowly. I said, "What do you think he told me?" She gripped the counter. She said, "I do not know, but you have been different since then." "Different how? Colder? More distant? Like you've already checked out?" I said, "Maybe I have." The honesty was a clean break. Her eyes widened. She said, "What does that mean?" I said, "It means exactly what it sounds like." She said, "Are you saying you want to leave?" I said, "I am saying I already have. Mentally, anyway. The rest is paperwork." She moved toward me and said, "No. We can fix this. Whatever Hudson said. Whatever you think happened." I said, "Caruso's. 2 weeks ago. Friday night. Corner booth." All the color drained from her face. She said, "He is just a friend." I said, "Do not." She said, "It is true. We were just talking." I said, "At a romantic Italian restaurant, in a corner booth, on a Friday night, after you accused me of interrogating you for asking about your plans." She said, "It was not like that." I said, "What was it like? Explain it to me." She was crying now, not performative tears, but the deep, heaving kind. She said, "He is someone I used to work with. We ran into each other at Target a few weeks ago. We got coffee to catch up. That is all." I said nothing. She said, "The dinner. He was having a hard time. His divorce had just finalized. He needed someone to talk to." I said, "So you took him to a romantic restaurant and sat in a corner booth and did not tell your husband about any of it?" She said, "I knew you would overreact." I said, "Overreact? You mean react at all? What you did crossed the line, and you knew it, which is why you hid it. She said, nothing happened. We just talked. I said, about what? His failed marriage? How hard divorce is. How nice it is to have someone who understands. Silence. Then I said, let me guess. He complained about his ex-wife. You commiserated. Maybe you complained about me. You said I asked too many questions. That I did not give you space. He agreed because that is what people who want something do. They validate you. She said, you are twisting this. I said, from where I am standing, it looks simple. You wanted to spend time with another man without me knowing. So you picked a fight about questions and made me the bad guy to clear the path. She collapsed into a chair. She said, I am so sorry. I am so sorry. It was stupid. I was not thinking clearly. I said, you were thinking very clearly. Clear enough to choose a restaurant across town. Clear enough to hide it. Clear enough to blow up at me for asking a simple question. She said, please, we can fix this. We can go to counseling. I will cut all contact with him. Whatever you want. I sat down across from her and said what I had come to say. I said, I do not want to fix this. She said, what? I said, I am done. Not because of him specifically, because of what you turned into. The woman I married would not have snuck around. She would not have called normal questions controlling. She would not have made me feel crazy for caring about your life. She said, I can change. I said, you probably can, but I do not want to wait to see if you do. She said, you are not even going to try. I said, try what? Try to trust you after you lied. Try to feel secure after you called communication interrogation. Try to be happy with someone who needed attention from another man to feel valued. I said, quietly, I saw an attorney today. Papers will be filed by the end of the week. She said, no, please, no, I love you. I said, you love the idea of me, the stability, the reliability. But you did not love me enough to be honest, and I cannot build a life on that. I stood. I said, I will sleep in the guest room until I find a place. The house is in your name. You can stay. I will be out within the month. She said, this is because of Miami, is it not? You are punishing me. I said, Miami was me taking a breath. This is me making a decision. I packed a pillow and a week's worth of clothes and moved into the guest room. Around midnight, she slipped a note under the door. In the morning, I found it, read it, and folded it into my pocket. It said, I know I messed up, but throwing away 8 years over dinner with a friend seems extreme. Please reconsider. I will do anything. I did not keep it for sentiment. I kept it because Mr. Sterling might need it as part of the story of how this ended. Tuesday, I went to work. I ate lunch with Hudson and told him the truth. He said, how do you feel? I said, relieved, like I can finally breathe. He said, good. You deserve better than that. I said, thank you for telling me about Caruso's. I needed to know. He said, that is what friends are for. When I got home that evening, Jasmine tried again. She said, I ended it. I blocked his number. I deleted him from everything. See, she showed me her phone. I said, okay. She said, okay, that is it. I said, what do you want me to say? Good job doing what you should have done weeks ago. She said, I want you to say we can work through this. I said, we cannot. I already told you that. She said, why not? I said, because trust is not something you rebuild in a day, or a week, or even a month. And I do not have the energy to try. She stared at me, desperate. She said, so that is it. One mistake and you are gone. I said, it was not one mistake. It was a series of choices. And the last one I am choosing is leaving. I walked to the guest room and closed the door. Friday came faster than I expected. Mr. Sterling called around noon and said, the papers are ready. You can pick them up, or I can have them served directly. I said, I will pick them up. I want to hand them to her myself. He said, are you sure? Most people prefer distance. I said, I am sure. I left work early and drove to his office. The envelope felt heavier than it should have, as if it already knew what it contained. When I got home, Jasmine was sitting on the couch with the look of a person who had rehearsed every possible version of the next hour. I said, we need to talk. She said, we do. I set the envelope on the coffee table between us. She said, what is that? I said, divorce papers. I need you to sign them. Her face crumbled. She said, you actually did it. I said, I told you I would. She said, I thought, If I gave you space, if I showed you I was serious about changing, I said, it is not about space. It is about respect. And you stopped respecting me when you chose to hide things. She picked up the envelope, shook hands, then set it down. She said, I cannot sign these. I said, you will, eventually. This starts the process. She said, what if I refuse? I said, then it takes longer. The outcome does not change. She looked at me with something like hatred, a last refuge when tenderness fails. She said, you went to Miami to punish me. I said, I went to Miami to think. And while I was there, I realized something. I was happier in 3 days alone than I've been in 3 months with you. That line hit her like truth always does. She said, I gave you 8 years of my life. I said, and I gave you 8 years of mine. We are even. She said, this is cold. This is not you. I said, no, this is exactly me. You just never bothered to learn who that was. I stood and said, I found a place. A month-to-month rental. I'm moving my things out this weekend. You can keep whatever furniture you want. I do not need much. She said, where? I said, does it matter? She did not answer. I boxed up my clothes, my laptop, my important documents. Everything else could wait. She appeared in the doorway and said, my parents are going to ask questions. I said, tell them the truth. Or do not. I do not care anymore. They will likely blame me, but that is between you and them. She watched me pack in silence. Then she said quietly, I really did love you. I said, past tense. Interesting choice. She said, that is not what I meant. I zipped the bag. I said, I will be back tomorrow for the rest. Please do not be here when I come. It will be easier. She said, this is really happening. I said, yes. She said, I never thought you would actually leave. I said, I know. That was the problem. I carried my bag downstairs and out to my car. I did not look back. The apartment I found was small, 1 bedroom on the 2nd floor, but it was mine. No shared history in the paint. No argument trapped in the carpet fibers. I set up a bed frame, a television on a plain console, and ordered pizza. I sat on my new couch and felt something I had not felt in a long time. Peace. Saturday, I drove back to the house. She had left like I asked. I packed the rest of my things, loaded them into a truck I had borrowed from Hudson. On the kitchen counter, she had left the envelope, signed. I was not surprised. Mr. Sterling had told me she might resist and then relent. The process had begun. Sunday, I slept until 10, made breakfast in my own kitchen, went for a run, and did nothing productive. It was perfect. Monday morning, I returned to work, the most ordinary salvation in the world. No drama. No wondering where she was or what she was doing. Hudson met me for coffee. He said, how's the new place? I said, quiet. He said, quiet or lonely? I said, quiet. Good quiet. I forgot what that felt like. 3 weeks later, Mr. Sterling called with an update and an ask. He said, she is asking for half the value of your car. I said, no, he said, that is what I figured. I will handle it. She did not get the car. She did not get anything that was not already hers. The settlement was clean and fast. 67 days after filing, it was official. I was free. 6 months later, I ran into Jasmine at Target. She looked different, tired, older in a way the mirror does not catch until you see someone you used to know standing under fluorescent lights. She opened her mouth like she might say something. I nodded once, polite and brief, then kept walking. There was nothing left to say. That weekend, I flew back to Miami. I booked the same hotel. The same stretch of beach waited like a calm I could return to at will. This time I was not running from anything. I was walking toward myself. I swam, then stretched on a towel, listening to children build castles and waves erase them. The simplest lesson about impermanence delivered on a loop without words. That evening I ate at a restaurant where no one looked at me like they needed something, and I watched the ocean darken to a color that did not have a name. A year later, the life I lived before barely recognized me. The apartment had become a house, a small 2-bedroom rental in a better neighborhood with a tree that tapped my bedroom window when the wind got playful. I got a promotion at work and built a team that trusted me because I told the truth quickly. I started lifting weights again. I saw my nephews more. I called my mother on Sundays not because I was lonely, but because it is good to hear the voice of someone who taught you what love looks like when it is not a performance. I reconnected with friends I had lost to the slow erosion of accommodating someone who did not believe that communication is love's daily work. Hudson and I grabbed lunch on a Wednesday. He said, "You look good. Night and day from last year." I said, "I feel good. Better than I have in a long time." He said, "Any regrets?" I said, "Not even once." He said, "Heard through a friend. She is engaged." I took a bite of my sandwich, chewed, swallowed, and said, "Good for her." He grinned. He said, "That is it." No reaction. I said, "What are you looking for?" "I hope she's happy. I hope she learned something." But honestly, I did not think about her much. And that was the clean truth. He said, "You seeing anyone?" I said, "Nothing serious. I'm not in a rush." He said, "Smart." That weekend I flew to Miami again. Third time since the divorce. It had become a reset button, the place where I remembered who I am outside of what I am to someone else. I sat on the same beach and watched the sun pour itself into the horizon, like it always does, no matter who is watching. I thought about the argument that had started everything, the quiet I had claimed, the trip I had taken out of defiance that turned into a doorway. I thought about the Cold War at home, the confirmation in a corner booth, the attorney's calm, the weight of an envelope, and the strange lightness that followed. Jasmine had wanted freedom without responsibility, privacy without partnership, space without communication. I had given her all of that in the one way that actually honors both people, by leaving. There was irony in it, but the irony did not bite. It felt instructive, like a math problem finally solved. By demanding I stop asking questions, she had pushed me to stop caring about the answers. And once I stopped caring, leaving became simple. My phone buzzed. A message from Natalie, a woman I met at a work conference in Dallas last month. She is a project manager at a different firm, a black woman with a direct, kind way of speaking and a laugh that sounds like the end of a hard day. We had talked for hours about everything and nothing. Our parents, the best barbecue in the Midwest, how silence could be generosity when it is chosen rather than imposed. She said, "How is Miami?" I said, "Perfect. Wish you were here next time." She said, "Deal." I smiled and put the phone away. The sky turned orange and purple, then indigo. I finished my drink and stood, brushing sand from my shorts. I thought about the lesson I had purchased with 8 years, a weekend in Miami, a lawyer's retainer, and the cost of learning the difference between love and possession. When someone shows you who they are, believe them. When someone demands space as a shield against accountability, give them exactly that, and take what you need in the bargain: your time, your clarity, your capacity to breathe in a room that is not counting your questions. I walked back toward the hotel thinking about tomorrow, a jet ski rental in the morning, a Cuban sandwich for lunch at the place where the bread cracks just right, calls return in the afternoon, maybe a video chat with Natalie if she wanted to see the ocean at dusk through my phone screen. Life felt simple in a way that did not diminish its meaning. It felt like a clean table where I could lay out everything I am and not apologize for taking up the space I occupy. I had claimed my freedom in Miami the first time I booked a ticket and turned my location off. I kept it by refusing to argue with someone who did not want a partner so much as an alibi. The truth is not dramatic once you speak it plainly. I wanted a marriage built on transparency and warmth. She wanted a story where answers were optional. I could not live in her version any longer, so I chose mine. And when I look back now, I do not count the loss. I count the gain. A home that is quiet for the right reasons, friends who tell the truth, work that respects what I bring, a body that feels strong again, a phone that does not buzz with panic at 2 in the morning, and a horizon that still knows how to catch the sun and let it go. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and share this video with your friends. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a powerful story drop.